all have one precious life. And when we ask people what will make theirs meaningful, they usually tell us two types of things. So on the one hand, they'll often say that they want to be successful or achieve certain goals or contribute in some way. So we would say that they want to be effective. And then they'll also tell us typically that they want to feel good, to have meaningful relationships, or to have good health and well-being. And so we summarize that as well-being. So with these two different objectives in mind, the effectiveness and the well-being, there comes a problem, which is that very often people are ending up trading off between the two things. Often with the people that we're working with, it's actually that the effectiveness is there most of the time, but it's the well-being that takes a hit. And whether that's long hours of travel or time on video calls, or it's taking work calls at weekends or on holidays, we often see that they are making those trade-offs. And that might be fine in the short term. It might well get them results, but in the longer term, it's going to have a hit on their effectiveness and their productivity overall. When we're not taking the time to recharge, our brains are going to be more likely to be in a protect state, so a fight or flight state, where actually our prefrontal cortex, so the part of our brain that brings our most human, highest forms of thinking, just isn't going to be working as well. And so we're not going to be bringing our best thinking to the problems. And also, over the longer term, we know that when the brain is constantly in that fight or flight state and we're feeling stressed, it affects the structure and the functioning of the brain. So we wanted to answer with this book, what does it really take to have effectiveness and well-being work in concert, so to complement each other rather than to work against each other? To do that, what we've tried to do is really come up with a practical roadmap, drawing from all the different elements of our expertise. So my background as a neuroscientist and in adult development psychology, and my colleague Vanessa's background as a yoga teacher and a breathwork therapist, as well as both of our work in executive coaching. And we've also then brought to bear plenty of scientific data to the problem. And also we've spoken to a number of remarkable individuals from many walks of life who we think have little pieces of this puzzle about what it takes to have effectiveness and well-being work together. On the performance curve, we've cracked the conundrum of how to have effectiveness and well-being and to have the two be mutually reinforcing. And we've done that by building our inner capacity to deal with change and complexity. So what does that mean? Life is full of change and complexity, and the last couple of years have been a stark illustration of that. And we can deal with that change and complexity by throwing our resources at it. We can be reactive, we can, in an adrenaline-fueled way, really work through issues and get to the other side. And then the chances are we'll have spent our resources, we'll need to rest and regroup, and then go again when the next crisis hits. And we call that cycle a boom and bust curve. By contrast, if we look at those challenges that we're facing and we really step back and ask ourselves, how can I grow or work in a different way to face this challenge? That's what we mean by being on the performance curve. So it's to look at our inner operating system, our default responses, so our mindsets, our emotional reactions, and our habits, and to ask ourselves, how can we think differently, react differently, or work in a different way that allows us to get a different result? So for example, let's say I'm facing a hurdle at work. I could push through it. I could push my team, and the chances are I'd get a result in the short term. But what if I were to step back and ask, how am I contributing to this problem? What assumptions am I making? How can I work differently with other people or with my team to get a different result? I'm going to hopefully find better solutions, and I'm also going to grow and learn in my team as well, so that next time round, the problem is going to be easier. Being on the performance curve is not about being happy or about being comfortable. It's actually sometimes about being uncomfortable because we ask ourselves those challenging questions. But the idea is that over time, it will become a more fulfilling place to be. We will be able to take on greater challenges with greater ease. We'll be able to focus ourselves on the more meaningful work as we better understand what really drives us. And we will be able to really over time have greater impact. And all of that will be with greater ease so that we can put more into our well-being. And that's where the virtuous cycle comes in, because of course, once we're feeling better, we do better, and it keeps working in a positive cycle from there. That's not to say that we are expecting to live all of our lives on the performance curve, but the key is to really recognize when we're on the boom and bust curve, and what's causing that, and how we can get back to the performance curve. So we outlined 3 catalysts to be on the performance curve: the wisdom catalyst, the fuel catalyst, and the connection catalyst. So the wisdom catalyst is our ability to see and adapt our inner operating system. So to notice our mindsets, our emotional reactions, and our habits, and to question whether they're serving us and find different ones to get different results. So let's say, for example, that I start to notice that when people disagree with me in meetings, I find myself moving into the protect state that I described earlier. And I pay attention to why I'm going into protect state. And I start to realize that it's actually because when people disagree with me, I feel like they're questioning my knowledge and my experience. And it really matters to me to feel knowledgeable and experienced and have other people see me in that way too. So I might say to myself, okay, well, I'm in protect state and that's actually not really serving me. I'm not bringing my best thinking at a time when I'd really like to be able to. So how could I approach things differently? And I might start to shift my attention to another way of thinking. For example, when somebody disagrees with me, it's actually a chance to hear what they've got to say about the situation. And I might pick up new ideas and knowledge and actually round out my knowledge and experience and maybe even contribute something to theirs. So what I've done there is I've actually noticed a driver of my own, a hidden driver, and I've flipped it around to work to my advantage. That's actually going to then put me more into an explore state in my brain, because I will be drawn by the rewards and opportunities of being able to round out my knowledge and experiences. And what you can see I've done there is shift my inner operating system just in a subtle way that's actually going to help me to bring my best. My brain will be firing on all cylinders and hopefully will then get a better result. So the second catalyst is the fuel catalyst. And this is about how we can sustain ourselves on the performance curve over the longer term. And part of this is about having a clear sense of purpose. When we've got that clear sense of purpose, it helps to fuel us to keep doing development because we're motivated to bring our best. But it also helps us to go after and spend time on what we find meaningful. We better understand ourselves. And again, that's going to help bring out the explore state that I alluded to earlier. Alongside that sense of purpose, we also know that it's very important to have habits that are going to support us to be on the performance curve. So these are habits that are going to help us to notice when we're more in protect state, to have techniques to shift to explore state, so that we can reset ourselves or we can just get a fresh perspective. Many people know that mindfulness is a powerful technique of this kind. We uncovered so many different techniques. So techniques that draw more on breathing or on different kinds of movement or on different kinds of journaling, writing, things that we can do to really reset ourselves. And so what we encourage people to do is to identify 1 or 2 tools that they're going to use daily so that they can set themselves up for their best. And then also have in their pocket a couple of tools that they can pull out when they're feeling knocked off balance by some kind of setback or challenge and they want to get back on track. So for example, when I'm feeling under pressure, one of the tools that I often use is just a very simple breathe in for 3 and out for 6. So that lengthens my out breath and settles me down, puts me back more into an explore state. And then the third catalyst is the connection catalyst. And this is all about finding fellow travelers to support us on the curve. So how we can have developmental relationships where we can share vulnerably what's going on for us. So our mindsets, our emotions and our habits, and get challenged. This is not about it being cozy. It's about some edge and challenge that comes with the empathy that the other person can bring. So I think there are 3 things we can do to really help others be on the performance curve. And the most important is to be role models of it ourselves. So to open up a little chink to share with other people how we're striving to be on the performance curve. Let's say we've given a great speech or written a great document or whatever it is, rather than simply just saying thanks when other people compliment us, we can let them know what it is that we've done to show up well. Perhaps we've done a little bit of mindfulness beforehand or a breathing technique like I outlined, or perhaps we've reframed our mindsets to say, rather than this feeling like a challenging speech, it's actually an opportunity to share some ideas that are important to me. So it might seem a little bit vulnerable to share something of ourselves we wouldn't normally share, but it's an invitation and an encouragement to others to do their work on their inner operating systems too. And more importantly, it's normalizing that this kind of work isn't something we need to save up to do with a therapist or a coach. It's actually just something that's part of everyday life. The second thing we can do is to look for opportunities to strengthen one-to-one relationships into developmental relationships. And then finally, the third thing we can do is to look at the developmental cultures in the teams that we're involved in. And we know that, feedback's been on the agenda for the last few years. Many organizations have worked to improve their performance management processes. And part of that has been to encourage a more regular feedback. But we see feedback as just one part of a developmental dialogue that we're seeking to encourage overall. And so you might look and say, well, okay, what's the level of developmental dialogue going on in my teams? Are people sharing openly the kinds of things that I've talked about, or are they not really feeling the support and comfort to do that? And then you can look at what it would take to increase that. With the book, we hope that people will use it to create their own roadmap. But let me offer a couple of ideas. The first is to get really good at noticing where you are on that protect mode, explore mode spectrum that I described earlier. And in particular, what is it that triggers you to go into protect mode? Because when you start to understand that and look at the patterns around it, you'll start to uncover your hidden drivers. The second idea would be journaling. The data behind journaling is really strong, just like it is for mindfulness. And there's a particular kind of journaling, which we call expressive writing, which has a lot of evidence behind it. So this is where you write your stream of consciousness, and particularly your deepest thoughts and feelings over the course of a few minutes, perhaps up to 10 minutes. It's got a good evidence that it can reduce your stress levels, help you to shift back more into explore state, even boost your immune system. And actually there's studies that show things like when you give people little puncture wounds and then monitor their recovery based on whether or not they're doing some expressive writing or not, you'll actually see that people who are doing the expressive writing will recover their wound injuries quicker. And it's doing something with our immune systems, which is pretty amazing. If you prefer something a bit more concise or structured, then the alternative I can offer is something we call the daily review. So this is where at a certain time in the day, perhaps beginning or end of the day, you take stock. So you say, okay, imagine it's the end of the day. What did I learn today? Particularly, what did I learn about myself, the way I operate? And then you say, well, how am I going to show up differently tomorrow? What are my intentions for tomorrow? What am I hoping to accomplish or bring to the day? And how am I going to show up to make that become a reality? And then the third idea is to think of one relationship that you can make more developmental. You can benefit, and ideally they can benefit from having deeper, more nourishing conversations about your development. And extend a hand, be vulnerable yourself or invite them to do the same. And it might feel uncomfortable at first, but when we help people to do that, they always tell us that it is valuable, rewarding and nourishing and something that they really relish. We started this process with a hypothesis that we could marshal neuroscience and adult development psychology and these holistic domains to really help us unlock how to have more effectiveness and more well-being. But even we were surprised by how strong the data was in many cases. There was plenty of scientific research, which our helpful research assistant managed to bring to bear on this. And also there was so much commonality in the techniques that our diverse interviewees were using to help them be at their best. But yet, on the other hand, I didn't learn any of this stuff at school. I wasn't taught any of these techniques at school, and I very little again at home. And my guess is that that's the same for many of us of my generation. I think that's changing. When I went into my high school the other day to give a talk, almost all the pupils there were aware of the idea of the growth mindset. And that's thanks to the work of Carol Dweck and others, which has found its way into education systems all over the world. But what about bringing this to much younger children? And what about having a much more integrated point of view about how to really set people's brains up to be at their best over their lifetimes and to start that work from a very young age? So this is where the paradox is that I finished the book with. On the one hand, we're very happy to have contributed to a version of that integrated point of view for how to develop and support adults to grow. But on the other hand, I think I would love that in a decade or two, our work is redundant, because that work is really being systematically done at a much younger age. And think of the benefit that that would bring to those young people themselves, to those around them, and also to society at large.